I'll pay you $200 a month. Mountain man miner told fat girl cook she cooked his heart. I'll pay you $200 a month, the mountain man shouted, if someone can cook a meal that doesn't kill my men. His voice rolled through the frozen air like a blast from the mine itself. Virginia City, Montana Territory, winter of 1904. Snow clung stubbornly to the muddy streets. Coal smoke hung low over the town, and tempers at the Golden Eagle gold mine burned hotter than the boiler in the stamp mill. 40 miners had walked off the job that morning, not over wages, not over hours, but over something much more dangerous. The food. Your last cook poisoned half the bunkhouse, one of the miners yelled. We're not going back down that shaft until we know we're not eating rat stew and boot leather. Laughter rippled through the crowd, but beneath it ran real anger. Men with hollow cheeks and calloused hands rubbed their stomachs like wounded animals. Cassian Colossus Ironforge stood in the middle of the street, a giant among rough men. At 43, he was more boulder than man, 6'8", built like the mountain that had tried to bury him more than once. His dark hair was streaked with silver, his beard wild, his face carved with old scars from cave-ins and grizzly fights. He wore a battered leather coat and boots caked in mine mud. He was not the kind of owner who watched from an office window. He dug beside his men, bled beside his men. But today, they were ready to walk away from everything he had spent 15 years building. I said $200 a month, he repeated, voice sharper this time. Board covered, warm bunk, respect from 40 hungry men. Who's brave enough to feed them? Heads turned, no one stepped forward. Cooking for 40 starving miners was hell work. Doing it up at a high country mine in winter with half-frozen supplies and men who could break you in half if they didn't like their stew was worse than hell. Cassian felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. If he lost these men, the Golden Eagle died. He'd clawed it out of the rock with his own hands. He wasn't about to watch it collapse over a pot of inedible beans. Silence thickened. Then a clear, steady voice cut through the cold. I can do it. Cassian turned. The crowd parted just enough for him to see the woman standing there. She was tall and generous in every line of her body, wrapped in a flour-dusted coat and an apron that had clearly seen battle in a kitchen. Felicity Flick Honeycutt, 26, with honey-blonde hair braided back from a round, warm face. Her blue eyes were bright and determined, even as the men began to snicker. She's going to eat more than the miners. $200 a month? She'll cost him double in groceries alone. The cruel jokes landed like stones, but Flick didn't flinch. In her hands, she carried a steaming apple pie, its golden crust glossy, its cinnamon scent curling through the icy air like a promise. You need a cook, she said, meeting Cassian's stare without looking away. I need work. I've been feeding 100 people a day for 10 years. Your 40 are nothing I can't handle. Cassian's stomach growled at the smell of the pie, betraying him. He hadn't tasted real comfort food since his mother died. The memory stirred something old and aching in his chest. $200 a month, he said slowly. 3 meals a day, no shortcuts, no men sick in the bunkhouse. Flick's smile was small but fierce. You'll have more trouble keeping them out of the bunkhouse between meals. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd, this time not at her expense. Cassian studied her one last moment. The miners watched, waiting to see if their mountain man boss had finally gone mad. Fine, he said. You get 1 week. If my men are happy and breathing at the end of it, The job is yours." Flick shifted the warm pie in her hands and nodded once. "Then you better tell 'em," she said. "Their last bad meal is already behind them." "Before we go into that first week in the mine kitchen, tell me, where in the world are you listening to this story from right now?" The next morning, long before dawn had crawled over the mountains, Flick Honeycutt trudged up the icy trail toward the Golden Eagle mine. Snow squeaked under her boots, her breath clouded in the air, and the wind knifed across her cheeks. But her steps were steady, purposeful. She had fed lumber camps, railroad crews, and a full hotel kitchen during peak season. A mine full of hungry men didn't scare her. What awaited her inside the cookhouse, however, nearly did. The place looked like it had survived a war. The long wooden tables were sticky with old grease. The iron stove was coated in a thick layer of soot and something unidentifiable that had once been food. The pantry stank of mildew. A dead mouse lay next to a cracked bag of flour. Pots were stacked haphazardly beside pans, stained black by years of neglect. Flick set her basket down and exhaled through her nose. "No wonder the old cook poisoned them," she muttered. For a moment, she simply stood there, fingertips pressed to the edge of the work table, absorbing the overwhelming chaos. Then she rolled up her sleeves. "Work defines you," her mother always said. "Make it careful, make it proud, or don't bother showing your face." She began with the stove. It took her 2 hours of scrubbing before the iron shone enough to reflect fire again. She tossed every spoiled ingredient, scrubbed the pantry shelves with vinegar, chased 3 more mice out with the broom. By the time Cassie and Ironforge arrived to check on her, the cookhouse smelled of soap and fresh pine, and Flick was hauling buckets of steaming water like she'd been born in a camp kitchen. Cassian paused in the doorway, genuinely stunned. "You did all this in one morning?" he asked. Flick straightened, cheeks pink from both exertion and cold. "If a cookhouse isn't clean, nothing else matters." Cassian nodded once, respectfully. "You'll need to cook for 40 men in less than 3 hours. Supplies are in the storeroom." "I've already checked," Flick replied. "Your dry goods are fine. The meat needs trimming. And your vegetables—" She sighed. "Well, I'll work with what I can." Cassian huffed out a laugh. "That's more optimism than I've heard in this place in years." He left her to work, and work she did. By noon, Flick had turned chaos into order, and order into magic. A massive pot of beef stew simmered slowly on the stove, rich with garlic, thyme, and onion. Cornbread baked in 3 cast-iron skillets, its buttery scent filling every crack in the room. She roasted carrots glazed in brown sugar, mashed potatoes whipped with fresh cream, and prepared a large pan of apple crumble because she knew men who had been fed poorly for too long needed something sweet to remind them of home. The bell rang. Miners trudged in, faces dirty, eyes exhausted. They expected another fight with their stomachs. Some muttered complaints. Others braced themselves, but when they stepped inside, the entire room fell silent. "What is that smell? I think I'm dreaming." That can't be for us." Flick carried out the first tray, bowls of stew thick with beef and vegetables, and placed them on the table. "Eat while it's hot," she said simply. The men attacked their bowls like wolves. A hush fell. Then groans of satisfaction rose around her. "Lord above, this is real food. I haven't eaten stew like this since my wedding. My grandmother never made cornbread this good." Cassian entered quietly, leaning against the doorframe as he watched his men devour the meal. For the first time in months, The crew looked alive, strong, content. Flick brought him a bowl herself. "What do you think?" she asked. Cassian tasted it. The heat washed over his tongue first. Warm, deep, perfectly balanced. The beef melted. The seasoning was precise. The broth reminded him painfully of evenings long ago when his mother would cook to keep the winter cold away. He set the spoon down, jaw tight. "It's good," he said. "Just good?" Flick teased. Cassian glanced at her, the corner of his mouth twitching like it almost wanted to smile. "It's the best meal I've had since I was 12. Flick blinked, touched by the unexpected vulnerability in his voice. "Then I'll do better tomorrow," she said softly. Cassian's eyes narrowed in quiet admiration. "You're going to ruin these men. They're never going to accept anything less again." Behind them, one of the miners shouted with his mouth full, "Boss, if you don't keep this woman, we'll walk out again." The cookhouse erupted in laughter. Flick turned bright pink. Cassian's voice dropped an octave as he looked at her. "1 week? That's what I promised. But I think I already know how this ends." She swallowed hard. "Do you want to keep me on, then?" His gaze swept her face, with that steady, deliberate way of his that saw everything. "I want to see what you do tomorrow," he said. The week that followed changed the Golden Eagle mine more than any new vein of gold ever could. Every dawn, before the sky even hinted at light, Flick lit the cookhouse stove. The dark would still cling to the windows, frost feathering the glass, and the town below lay silent under its blanket of snow. But inside the kitchen, warmth bloomed with the first spark. Flick moved like someone who belonged to a stove the way others belonged to saddles or rifles. Steady, sure, with hands that always knew what ingredient to reach for next. By the time the miners trudged up the trail for breakfast, the scent of frying bacon and fresh biscuits floated all the way to the bunkhouses. "Bless that woman," some of them muttered each morning. "She's the only reason I get out of bed." "I'd marry her for these biscuits alone." Cassian heard those comments from the doorway more than once. He tried to pretend they didn't bother him, but the tightening in his jaw gave him away every time. Breakfast became an event. Stacks of flapjacks dripping in butter, scrambled eggs soft as clouds, sausage sizzling in a pan twice as long as Flick's arm. She served each man with a smile, calling them by name within the first 3 days. And she noticed things. Who liked their coffee strong, who preferred extra potatoes, who always came in last because he helped the older miners up the path. Men who hadn't smiled in months began cracking jokes. Coal dust didn't seem quite so heavy on their shoulders. Work songs returned to the shaft. Even the mine foreman, grumpy old Buckley, stopped complaining for entire stretches of time. Cassian noticed it all. He also noticed her. He noticed how Flick hummed while she cooked, how she tucked stray hair behind her ear with the back of her wrist, how flour dust coated her cheeks like soft snowfall. He noticed the curve of her arms when she kneaded dough, strong and capable. He noticed that she never ate until every one of his men had been served. And he noticed something else, something that unsettled him more than a collapsing shaft. Being around her made him feel warm, dangerously warm. One evening, after the men had eaten and returned to the bunkhouse, Flick remained in the kitchen scrubbing a pot large enough to bathe a mule. Cassian stepped in quietly, meaning only to check supplies. But he paused when he saw her struggling to reach the far side of the kettle. He crossed the room in 3 strides. "Let me?" Flick looked up, eyes wide. "Oh, no, I can manage." "You don't have to manage everything," he said. Though his voice was gruff, something gentle moved under it. He lifted the kettle as if it weighed nothing at all. Flick blinked. That was full of water. "I know." She dried her hands nervously. Cassian set the clean pot aside, then hesitated. Something rare for him. "You don't rest enough." "I rest when I'm done." "That's not rest," he murmured. Flick looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Cassian, this kitchen, these meals, this work, it makes me happy. You cook for 40 men every day and still smile." "I smile," she said lightly, "because they deserve to be taken care of." Cassian's gaze caught hers in a way that startled them both. "And you?" he asked quietly. "Who takes care of you?" Flick's breath hitched, but before she could answer, the door slammed open. Buckley stumbled in, half-frozen, beard frosted white. "Boss! Avalanche on the North Ridge! We need shovels, picks, men, now!" Cassian's expression hardened instantly. Duty surged back into him like fire into a forge. "Anyone trapped?" "Not sure yet." "I'll gather the crew." He turned to Flick. For one fleeting second, worry flickered in his eyes, not for the miners, for her. "Lock the door after we leave," he said. "Don't come out until I return." Flick nodded, fear whispering into her chest. As the men charged into the night, lanterns swinging, Cassian paused at the doorway and met her gaze one last time. Something unspoken moved between them, something that made Flick feel strangely steady, as if his look alone could anchor her to the floor. "I'll be back," he said. She believed him without question. Hours passed. Flick kept the stove burning, pacing the floor, whispering prayers. Snow battered the windows. Wind howled. Every sound made her jump. She hated sitting safely in the warm kitchen while the men fought ice and death outside, but she obeyed Cassian. He'd asked it, and she trusted his judgment more than she trusted her own heartbeat. When the door finally creaked open near dawn, Flick spun around. Cassian entered, soaked, bruised, exhausted, but alive. Snow melted off his coat in heavy clumps. His beard dripped with ice. He looked at her first, before anything else. That alone nearly made her cry. "All accounted for," he said hoarsely. "No one died." Flick rushed to him. "Sit! You're freezing!" He didn't argue, didn't tease, didn't play the stoic mountain man. He simply sat, hands shaking from cold. Flick draped a blanket over his shoulders, kneeling in front of him to remove his wet boots. Her hands were gentle but firm. Cassian watched her with an expression he rarely gave anyone, unguarded, raw, deeply human. "You're safe now," she murmured. Those words struck him harder than any falling rock. Something inside him cracked, softened, shifted. When her hands brushed his calf, he exhaled sharply, not from pain, but from something he couldn't name. "Flick," he said quietly. She froze, looking up at him. "You have no idea what you're doing to me." His voice trembled just enough to make her heart flip. But he said nothing more, and Flick didn't ask. They simply knelt there in the glow of the stove, two people warming in ways neither one was ready to admit aloud. The avalanche changed everything. Not because it destroyed part of the North Ridge, avalanches came with winter and mining both, but because of what it revealed. Not in the mountain, in Cassian. Flick had never seen the giant mountain man shaken before, never seen his breath tremble or his hands stiff with cold and exhaustion, never seen him walk through a door and look for her before anyone else. The morning after the rescue, Buckley directed the men back toward the shaft. Cassian turned to follow until his injured leg buckled beneath him. Flick caught him before he hit the ground. "You're not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I have work. You have injuries." Her tone brooked no argument. "And you're going to let me tend them." Cassian glared, but the fight in his eyes was more habit than conviction. Flick looped her arm under his and guided him toward the house on the hill, a cabin many assumed he barely used, though no one had ever been inside. She helped him up the steps, across the porch, and into the shadowed interior. What she saw there stole her breath. The cabin wasn't the rugged bachelor den she'd expected. Yes, there were antlers mounted above the hearth, tools hanging on every wall, a rifle rack near the door. But the place was immaculate, lived in, quietly cared for. A quilt, hand-stitched, faded, hung over the back of a chair. A shelf of books sat near the window. There was a rocking chair near the fire, worn in the exact way something gets worn when someone uses it every night. She turned slowly. "You live here alone?" Cassian didn't answer at first. He lowered himself onto the sofa, groaning as he unwrapped his coat. "It's easier that way." Flick set a pot of water to heat on the stove. "Lonely, though?" Cassian's eyes flicked toward the window as if he didn't trust himself to meet her gaze. "Lonely is safer." Flick said nothing, but her heart tugged. She knelt before him with warm cloths and bandages. Cassian tensed, not from pain, but because no one had touched him this gently in years. His muscles were knots beneath her fingers, his skin scarred from a lifetime of danger. "You don't let people close," Flick murmured. "No reason to. You kept 40 men alive for a decade." "That's work," he muttered. "You saved 5 lives last night." "That was duty." "And what I'm doing?" she asked softly, pressing a cloth to a bruise on his ribs. He swallowed hard. "I don't know." She looked up. "It's care, Cassian. Someone taking care of you." He closed his eyes, jaw clenching, as if the words themselves hurt. Flick worked quietly, washing blood from his skin, wrapping his ribs, cleaning the cuts on his hands. Cassian didn't speak. He watched her with the uneasy reverence of a man seeing something he'd wanted all his life and never believed he deserved. When she finished, the cabin smelled of soap and the faint sweetness of her baking from the morning. "Do you have food here?" she asked. He hesitated. "Sometimes I forget to eat." Flick stared at him. "Forget?" He shrugged one massive shoulder. "If I'm working, I don't notice." Flick wasn't sure whether to scold him, pity him, or hug him. She chose the middle path. She put a pot on the stove and set to work. Soon the cabin filled with the aroma of chicken soup, thyme, buttery biscuits, and steaming apples she had tucked into the bottom of her basket earlier that morning. When she placed the bowl in front of him, Cassian looked almost wary. "You made this here?" he asked quietly. "Where else would I make it?" "For me?" "Yes," Flick said. "Only you." Cassian swallowed. Something flickered in his eyes, a pain so old he barely remembered where it started. He lifted the spoon. The first taste made his shoulders sag. "This," his voice cracked, "this is what my mother used to make when I was sick." Flick's breath caught. She sat beside him, not touching him, simply letting the weight of the moment settle between them. "Cassian," she whispered, "you don't have to carry everything alone." He turned to her, and the firelight caught the wetness in his eyes. "It's all I've ever known." Flick reached out slowly and rested her hand over his. "Then let someone teach you different." Cassian didn't pull away. His fingers curled just barely over hers. A small sound escaped him, fragile, almost broken. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you take care of everyone else," she said. "Because no one takes care of you. Because you deserve more than sleeping with your boots still on in a cold cabin every night." Her voice softened. "Because you matter." Silence filled the room, thick, hot, trembling. Cassian shifted closer, the sofa creaking beneath his weight. "Flick," he said, low and rough, "you're dangerous." She blinked. "Me? You make this place feel—" He shook his head helplessly. "Different. Is that bad?" "No." His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's terrifying." Flick's heart pounded so hard she was sure he heard it. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then she stood abruptly, breaking the intensity before her courage dissolved entirely. "You need rest. Eat the rest of your soup. I'll tidy up." Cassian nodded, but his eyes never left her. As she moved around his kitchen, washing dishes, stoking the fire, arranging blankets, Cassian watched her with a gaze that bordered on reverent. Every soft step she took seemed to fold a piece of warmth into the walls. Every dish stacked seemed to settle something restless inside him. When Flick finally finished and reached for her coat, Cassian straightened. "You're leaving?" "For now," she said gently. "You need sleep. I'll check on you after dinner service." His expression shifted, something like disappointment mingled with fear. "I don't need—" "You do," she said. His mouth pressed into a stubborn line, but she stepped closer. "I'll be back. I promise." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, like a mountain giving permission. She left the cabin, closing the door softly behind her. Cassian sat alone in the warm quiet she had created, a room that felt, for the first time in years, less like a shelter and more like a home. He lifted a hand to his chest. His heartbeat felt unfamiliar, too strong, too alive, too involved. He exhaled shakily. "This woman," he whispered into the empty room, "is going to break me." But even he knew, deep inside, beneath all that iron and stone, she was doing the opposite. By the end of Cassian's second week of recovery, Flick had become as much a part of the cabin as the firewood stacked by the hearth. She arrived every morning before sunrise with fresh bread tucked under her arm, fed him steaming bowls of stew at noon, and read aloud from his old books at night until his eyes drifted shut. The miners noticed. They teased him endlessly. Cassian ignored them, but he didn't miss the way his ears burned red. Still, beneath the growing warmth, another presence lurked, quiet, patient, watching. It began with strange happenings around the mine. A cart of ore going missing, footprints near the ridge where no one worked, dynamite stolen from the supply shed. Cassian tried to shrug it off. Men prowled mining territory often, hoping to steal claims. But something about the pattern gnawed at him. Then one cold dawn, Cassian woke to Flick pounding hard on his cabin door. "Cassian, wake up! Something's wrong at the west shaft." He grabbed his coat and limped outside. A thick plume of smoke rose from the far side of the mountain. Miners were already running toward it, shouting. When they arrived, Cassian froze. The entrance to the west shaft had been blasted apart, obliterated by dynamite. Support beams lay twisted like broken ribs. Dust still hung in the air, choking and thick. Buckley pointed to the ground. "Footprints, big boots. This wasn't one of ours." Cassian scanned the wreckage, jaw tightening into stone. Someone had tried to sabotage the mine, and not just sabotage it. The west shaft was where Cassian's newest vein ran, the one worth more than any gold he'd ever found, the one he'd kept quiet on purpose until he knew it was stable. Only two people knew its true value, Cassian and the man he never spoke of. Flick stepped close. "Cassian, what's happening?" Cassian looked at her, then at the ruined earth yawning open like a wound. "I should have told you sooner," he said quietly. "This mine, it's the reason someone wants me dead." Flick sucked in a breath. "Dead?" Cassian nodded. "There's a man named Silas Crow, a claim jumper, a thief. He's been trying to steal mines across Montana for years. 2 winters ago, I pulled one of his men out of a snowbank after a blizzard. The fool confessed everything. Silas wants Golden Eagle, wants it badly." Flick's face drained of color. "Has he ever come here?" "Not yet," Cassian said grimly. "But this," he pointed toward the destruction, "this is his way of knocking." The miners gathered around, waiting for orders. Panic flickered between them. If Silas took the mine, they lost their homes. Their families lost their income. Everything fell apart. Cassian stood before them, injured, leaning on a crutch, but towering and unshakable. "We rebuild," he said simply. "No one touches what we've built." The men cheered, but Flick felt something different. Beneath his iron command, she sensed the tension tightening his shoulders, the warning in his eyes. Danger was coming, and Cassian intended to face it alone. He limped back toward the cabin. Flick hurried after him. "Cassian, wait!" He didn't stop until they were inside. He stood at the table, staring at the wall as though seeing something far beyond it. She touched his arm gently. "Talk to me." He exhaled slowly, long and heavy. "Silas doesn't just steal mines. He kills for them." He turned toward her. "If he knows about you, I won't risk that." "What do you mean?" she whispered. "I want you to leave the mine until this is over." Flick recoiled as if struck. "Leave? It's safer." "I'm not leaving you alone to face a man like that." "You have to." His voice rose, strained. "Flick, he's dangerous. He'll use whatever he can to break a man, and you—" His jaw clenched hard. "You are the only weak spot I have." Flick's heart slammed against her ribs. "I'm not your weak spot," she whispered. "I'm someone who can stand beside you." But Cassian shook his head. "I can't protect this mine and protect you. I don't need protection." "You do," he said more sharply than he meant to. "You're kind. You're good. Silas will use that. He'll take you hostage, or worse. I won't allow it." Flick stepped closer, chest tight. "Cassian, I'm not leaving because of fear. I'm staying because I care, because I—" "Don't say it," he growled suddenly. She froze. Cassian's breath hitched, raw and broken. "If you say it now, while I'm facing the worst danger of my life, I won't be able to think straight, and I can't afford that." Tears filled Flick's eyes. "You think I'll make you weaker?" "No," he whispered. "You make me want to live. That's the problem." The room fell silent, heavy with words unsaid. Then Cassian straightened, shoulders squaring like armor, sliding back into place. "Pack a bag," he said softly. "Buckley will take you to town." Flick didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward until she stood inches from him. "You listen to me, Cassian Ironforge," she said quietly, fiercely. "I didn't cook for you every day, fight for you in the mine, and sit by your side while you healed just to be sent away when things get hard." He closed his eyes. "Flick." "No," she whispered. "I stay, not because I'm brave, not because I'm stubborn, because I choose you. Whatever storm is coming, I'm part of it. Cassian opened his eyes, and Flick saw it. The fear, the longing, the certainty that he didn't deserve this kind of loyalty. He cupped the side of her face with one massive hand, thumb brushing her cheek. "You could be hurt," he murmured. "So could you," she replied, "and I'm not leaving you to face that alone." For a long moment, Cassian didn't speak. Then his forehead dropped to hers, a sigh escaping him. "You're going to be the end of me." Flick smiled through her tears. "Or the beginning." Outside, a crow screeched from the ridge, a warning, a promise. Silas Crow had arrived in Montana. The first sign of Silas Crow came with the horses. 6 of them, black as tar and silent as ghosts, stood at the edge of the ridge overlooking Golden Eagle Mine. Their riders wore dust-stained coats and revolvers strapped low on their hips. But the man in front, broad-shouldered, cruel-eyed, his beard streaked with gray, sat taller than the rest. Cassian recognized him at once. Silas Crow, a man who stole claims with bullets instead of papers, a man whose greed had carved graves up and down the Montana frontier. Cassian stepped out of the cabin with his crutch tucked under one arm and his rifle under the other. Flick stood behind him, her breath shaking, but her chin lifted in quiet defiance. Silas smirked. "Well now," he drawled, voice slick as oil. "Heard you hit a nice vein, Iron Forge. Thought I might come collect it." Cassian leveled his rifle. "You're trespassing." Silas laughed. "Trespassing? Son, everything west of the ridge is mine if I want it." "You'll leave now," Cassian said, steady as bedrock, "or I put you in the dirt." Silas leaned forward in his saddle. "You? With a broken leg and half a lung after that cave-in? I came here because you're weak, Cassian. Weak men lose minds." Flick stepped out from behind Cassian. "He's not weak," she said sharply, "and this mine doesn't belong to you." Silas's eyes snapped to her. His smile widened, slow and ugly. "Well now, who's this sweet little sugar cake?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "Not another word, Crow." But Silas was already studying her, her round face, her flour-dusted dress, her hands clenched but trembling. "A cook?" he guessed. "Iron Forge, you always did have strange taste." One of Silas's men snickered. Another spat in the dirt. Cassian didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle, aimed at the man who laughed, and pulled the trigger. The outlaw tumbled backward off his horse before he even heard the shot. Silas didn't smile now. The ridge went dead quiet. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the valley. Miners burst out of their bunkhouses with rifles, taking cover behind ore carts and boulders. Silas's men returned fire, bullets sparking against rock. Flick dropped to her knees behind the cabin steps, heart racing. "Cassian!" she shouted. "I'm fine!" he shouted back, though she saw him stagger as a bullet grazed his arm. He fired again, the force of the shot jarring his injured ribs. But he didn't stop. He planted himself like the mountain he was named for, unyielding, immovable. Silas rode straight for him. Cassian fired. Silas swerved. The 2 men closed the distance, one limping on foot, one charging on horseback. Flick's breath caught as Silas raised his revolver, aiming directly at Cassian's heart. "No!" she screamed. Before Silas could fire, Flick hurled herself forward, grabbing a shovel from beside the woodpile. She swung with every ounce of strength she had. Years of kneading dough and hefting cast-iron pots behind the blow. The metal blade cracked against Silas's wrist. His gun flew from his hand. Silas screamed, reeling sideways. Cassian seized the opportunity. He grabbed Silas by the coat, yanked him from the saddle, and threw him onto the frozen ground. The men crashed together in a tangle of fists, elbows, and curses. Cassian's injuries slowed him. Silas's weight bore down. Their struggle churned the dirt like a storm. Flick grabbed the fallen revolver, but her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped it. Silas pinned Cassian with a knee to the chest, snarling, "It's mine, all of it!" Cassian choked, struggling for breath. Flick stepped closer, gun trembling in her grip. "Let him go," she whispered. Silas didn't even look at her. "You won't shoot." Her hands shook harder. Cassian's vision blurred. Silas raised a jagged rock over Cassian's skull. Flick screamed and pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the ridge. Silas fell backward, clutching his shoulder, blood pouring through his fingers. His men froze, stunned. Cassian sucked in a ragged breath. Flick dropped the gun, knees buckling. "Cassian, Cassian, I—" He caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms trembling around her. "You saved my life," he whispered, voice raw. "You brave, stubborn woman, you saved me." Silas's men dragged their wounded leader away, retreating into the pines. No one dared fire another shot. Golden Eagle Mine was safe. But Cassian held Flick as if she were the only treasure he couldn't afford to lose. Night fell slowly over Golden Eagle Mine, the sky deepening from pink to violet, then to the soft, bruised blue of a long-forgotten lullaby. Lanterns flickered along the ridge while miners tended the wounded, cleared debris, and repaired what they could. But the heart of the mountain, the cabin on the hill, glowed like a warm ember in the cold. Inside, Cassian sat on the edge of his bed, chest wrapped in clean bandages, shoulder bruised, ribs aching with every breath. Flick knelt in front of him, her hands gentle as she dabbed at a cut on his cheek. "You should lie down," she murmured. "I'm fine," he said, though he winced immediately. She frowned. "You nearly died today, twice." Cassian caught her wrist lightly, not to stop her, but to anchor himself. "And both times you saved me." Flick looked away, blinking back tears. "I didn't think. I just saw him raising that rock. I couldn't lose you." Cassian's voice softened. "I told you to leave. You didn't, and thank God for that." She shook her head. "I stayed because this place feels like the first home I've had in years. And you," her breath trembled, "you're the first man who ever saw me as more than a joke, more than my size. You saw me." Cassian lifted her chin with 2 fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. "I didn't just see you, Flick. I admired you. I depended on you. He swallowed. "Then I loved you long before I had the courage to say it." Her eyes widened. "You love me?" Cassian nodded slowly, almost shyly despite his size. "I love the way you fill this cabin with warmth. I love how you feed men's stomachs and their spirits. I love how you stood between me and death today without thinking twice." His voice deepened. "And I love the woman you are, all of you, every curve, every kindness, every bit of you that makes this world better." Flick's breath hitched. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He brushed them away with his thumb. "Don't cry, honey." "I can't help it," she whispered. "No one has ever loved me like that." Cassian leaned in until their foreheads touched. "Then let me be the first of many days of it." The cabin crackled around them, fire painting their faces gold. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines like a blessing. Flick rested her hands on Cassian's broad chest, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "Cassian," she whispered, "what happens now?" He looked around the cabin, the hearth, the long table, the second chair he had built months ago but never used, then back at her. "Now," he said softly, "now we build a life together." Flick laughed through her tears, warm, surprised, overjoyed. Cassian pulled her into his arms, strong but gentle, holding her as if he had waited his whole life for this moment. And outside, Golden Eagle Mine glowed like a promise kept. Some stories linger long after the last word fades, not because of the danger or the gunfights, but because of the quiet moments, the warmth of a kitchen, a hand held during pain, a love that grows where no one expected it. Cassian and Flick remind us that comfort, courage, and devotion can be stronger than any mountain or mine. Thank you for listening all the way through their journey. It means more than you know. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from today? And if you still believe that love can rise from hardship and change a life, stay close. The next story is already waiting for you. Make the obese woman walk 50 miles. Outlaw's brutal plan, mountain man's cold vengeance. 50 miles, Cole Taggart drawled, spitting tobacco juice into the burned brown grass. That's how far this fat cow's gonna walk. If she drops before then, we leave her for the buzzards. The other outlaws roared with laughter. 7 men on horseback, saddlebags heavy with stolen bank money, riding light and easy under the Kansas sun. And behind them, stumbling through the dust like some broken pack animal, was Matilda Mattie Carson. Her cheeks were already raw from heat and wind, her dress dark with sweat, her stockings torn and sticky with blood where her shoes had rubbed her skin raw. 31 years old, nearly 300 pounds, and for 3 days now she had been dragged through the wilderness like a piece of unwanted luggage that refused to disappear. "Please," Mattie's voice came out as a ragged whisper, "just a little water. I can't feel my feet any more." Cole hauled his horse around, circling her like a vulture. "Can't feel your feet? Maybe they finally gave up trying to carry all that lard." His gaze swept over her body like a knife. "You should be grateful, sweetheart. Most women pay good money for a chance to get thin. You're getting the deluxe hell package, 50 miles or die trying." The gang ate it up. Every stumble, every flinch, every gasp turned into another joke. Mattie focused on breathing. One step, another, then another. The sun beat down like a hammer on the back of a skull. The air shimmered. The horizon blurred. Somewhere far away, meadowlarks were singing as if the world wasn't ending. She had been a bookkeeper in Dodge City that morning 3 days ago. Ink on her fingers, columns neat and perfect, life small but orderly. Now her world had shrunk to this: dust in her mouth, fire in her lungs, and 7 men betting quietly behind her back on which mile she would finally collapse. "Boss," one of them muttered, "she's slowing us down. Law ain't gonna chase us forever, but—" "No horse," Cole cut in flatly. "Not for her. Horses are valuable. She isn't. She walks or she dies. Either way, she ain't riding." And just like that, her worth was decided. Less than a horse, less than a saddle, less than the bullet it would take to put her down. When her knees finally buckled, the ground rushed up in a blur of yellow grass and red pain. The gang barely looked back. "Leave her," Cole said. "She's dead already. She just don't know it yet." Their laughter faded into the distance, hooves drumming farther and farther away until there was nothing left but wind and the vicious rasp of Mattie's own breathing. She lay there, cheek pressed to the baked earth, realizing with a strange detached calm that this was where it ended, alone, worth less than a horse. Then she heard it, another set of hoofbeats, slow, steady, coming from the opposite direction. A shadow fell over her, a massive buckskin stallion. Boots hit the ground. She forced her eyes open and saw him, a towering man in worn dark leather, jaw like granite, eyes the color of cold steel. "You're the bank clerk from Dodge," he said, voice flat, low, and deadly calm. "Name's Garrett Steele, U.S. Marshal. Get up if you want to live." Garrett Steele didn't offer his hand. He simply waited, arms folded across his broad chest, as if he expected Mattie to stand on her own, or die trying. The steel-gray eyes watching her held no pity, no impatience, no warmth, only assessment, a cold calculation of whether she would survive the next 10 minutes. Mattie pushed herself upright with trembling arms, her vision blurred, the horizon swaying like a ship deck. Garrett didn't move to steady her. He simply uncorked his canteen and held it out. "Drink. Slow." The first swallow burned like fire. The second felt like a blessing. Mattie gasped as her throat spasmed, but she obeyed his instruction, taking tiny sips until her head stopped spinning. "Good," Garrett said. "You're dehydrated, heat-struck, and weak from underfeeding. They did that intentionally. Makes hostages compliant." Hostage? The word still didn't feel real. She wanted to cry, out of shock, relief, humiliation, but tears cost too much water, and her dignity was hanging by threads. She wiped dust from her face instead, trying to gather herself. "They made me walk," she whispered. 3 days, barely any water, no food." I saw. How long had he been tracking them? How long had he watched her stumble through the prairie like livestock on its last legs? Garrett turned toward his horse, tightening a saddle strap with brusque precision. Everything about him was straight-lined and efficient, from the way he moved to the way he breathed. He looked carved rather than born, a man shaped by years of gunfire and solitude. "Can you ride?" he asked without looking at her. Yes. "Good. My spare horse is 2 miles south. You'll ride that. Then we follow the Taggart gang." Mattie's heart lurched. "Follow them? Marshal, Steele," he corrected. "Marshal's a title. Steele's the name." "Steele. I don't think I can help hunt outlaws. I'm barely standing." "You'll ride," he replied simply. "Horses do the work. You identify the men, that's all." When she hesitated, his gaze snapped to hers, sharp as a blade. "Your testimony is the difference between justice and them getting away with murder. You want them stopped? You want what they did to you to matter? Then you come with me." His words struck hard, not cruelly, truthfully. Garrett Steele didn't sugarcoat. He didn't soften. He handed reality to her raw and unvarnished. Mattie nodded. He mounted his stallion with the ease of a man who had spent half his life in a saddle. Then he paused, glancing down at her. "You walk 2 miles, you die. So you're riding with me until we reach the cache?" Mattie froze. She was painfully aware of her size, of the humiliation she'd already endured. But Garrett didn't blink. He didn't smirk. He didn't hesitate. "Up," he said. A single, simple command. No judgment in it. She reached for his hand. His grip was iron, lifting her with a strength so controlled she barely felt the strain until she was settled behind him. The stallion shifted. Mattie clung instinctively to Garrett's back, her arms wrapping around him for balance. His body went rigid for a moment, not from disgust, but from surprise, like someone unused to being touched at all. Then he nudged the horse forward. The world blurred into motion, a steady rhythm of hoofbeats, wind, and the warmth of Garrett's back against her chest. For the first time in days, Mattie wasn't falling behind. She wasn't crawling through dust. She wasn't worthless. She was alive and moving toward something instead of away from death. Garrett spoke suddenly, voice low enough that she almost missed it over the wind. "They told you that you weren't worth a horse?" Mattie swallowed hard. "Yes." "They were wrong," he said. "Don't forget that." The words weren't gentle. They weren't comforting. They were factual, a statement carved in stone. Mattie held on a little tighter. For balance, she told herself. Only that. They reached the hidden canyon where Garrett's spare mare, a calm chestnut creature, waited in shade. As he dismounted and prepared the horses, Mattie swayed, nearly collapsing. Garrett caught her elbow. His touch was steady, impersonal, but firm enough to hold her upright. "You're exhausted. That's not weakness. That's human." Mattie blinked. She'd expected cold pragmatism, not acknowledgement. Garrett handed her a piece of hardtack. "Eat, slowly." Then he added, "You did well so far." She stared. Compliments she suspected were rarer from Garrett Steele than rain in a drought. He didn't elaborate, didn't soften. But he mounted his horse, glanced back at her, and said quietly, "Stay close to me. You'll be safe if you do." Safe. The first time anyone had spoken that word to her in years. Mattie exhaled, settled onto the mare, and nodded. "I'll follow you." "You'd better," Garrett said, "because we're not stopping until justice does." Their horses turned west, straight toward the men who had tried to walk her to death. The prairie stretched endlessly ahead of them, waves of tall summer grass rolling beneath a molten sky, the heat rising in shimmering curtains. Mattie had never left Kansas in her life, and now she was riding into its vastness with a man who seemed carved from the same iron as his badge. Garrett Steele didn't look back often. When he did, it wasn't to check on her comfort. It was to assess, evaluate, ensure she was capable of continuing the pursuit. His eyes were instruments, scanning the horizon, reading the ground, calculating distances, danger, survival. "Tracks are fresh," he said as they crested a rise, "less than 6 hours old." Mattie stared at the faint grooves left by the outlaw's horses. To her, they were chaos. To him, they were a story. Number of riders, weight of their gear, the direction of their fear. "You can read all that?" she asked quietly. Garrett didn't look over. "You could, too, if you spent 15 years living by it." There was no pride in his voice, no boast, just fact. Mattie swallowed. "How long have you been a marshal?" "Too long?" He nudged his stallion into a smoother pace. "Started at 19. Figured if I died young, it'd solve a lot of problems." That startled her. You wanted to die?" He ignored the question. Or maybe he answered it by offering nothing at all. They rode in silence for miles. The world became a rhythm. Hoofbeats, wind, breath, heat. Under it all, Mattie felt the strain of her body, her thighs sore, her shoulders aching. But compared to the agony of walking 50 miles under threat of death, this was salvation. At midday, Garrett stopped at a lone cottonwood tree. The shade was thin, but it was enough. He handed her a canteen and a strip of dried venison. "Eat," he said. "Slow. You're still recovering." It was the 4th time today he'd reminded her to go slow, not gently. Garrett didn't seem to know the meaning of gentle, but consistently, like a man accustomed to keeping fragile things alive despite himself. "Why do you keep helping me?" she asked, surprising herself. Garrett chewed his own food, gaze fixed on the horizon. "You're the key to convicting them." "That's all?" A muscle ticked in his jaw. "And you're under my care. I don't lose people under my protection." Mattie absorbed that. Garrett Steele didn't love, didn't comfort, didn't indulge emotion, but he protected, fiercely, absolutely, as if failure were a personal sin. She set her food down, wiping sweat from her brow. "They said I wasn't worth anything, not even a horse." Garrett's head snapped toward her. His eyes were steel, cold, sharp, deadly. "They were wrong," he said in a low, uncompromising tone. "A human life has value. Anyone who says otherwise isn't a man. They're a coward with a gun." Mattie blinked rapidly, her throat tightening. She hadn't expected a defense. Not from him, not from anyone. Garrett stood suddenly. "We ride." The afternoon sun was brutal. Even Garrett began to sweat under his trail-worn coat. Mattie's vision swam with heat, but she forced herself upright, gripping the reins with renewed determination. She would not slow him down again. Not now. Not ever. Hours later, they reached the remains of a camp. Burned embers, a half-eaten rabbit, empty whiskey bottles. Garrett crouched, running his fingers over the ashes. "They left at dawn," he murmured. "One of them's injured. See the blood here?" Mattie shuddered. "Frank, the youngest. He cut his leg climbing a fence." Garrett nodded. "Good. Details like that help me. Keep talking." She suddenly realized he wasn't just using her knowledge. He was teaching her how to survive, giving her tools, offering her a way to be something more than a burden. They kept riding. Sunset bled across the plains, the sky turning red and gold and purple. Mattie's mind blurred with exhaustion, but Garrett seemed tireless until he wasn't. As twilight deepened, he dismounted abruptly, staggering for a moment. "Garrett!" Mattie slid off her horse, rushing toward him. "Are you hurt?" He steadied himself with a hand on his stallion's flank. "Not hurt, just dizzy." It took her a moment to understand. "You haven't eaten today," she whispered. Garrett straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. "Doesn't matter. We need to—" "No," Mattie said firmly. "Sit." Garrett blinked like she'd spoken a foreign language. "I don't sit," he said stiffly. "You do tonight." She surprised herself again. Her voice had weight now, steel under softness, and to her astonishment, Garrett obeyed, slowly, as if unused to anyone giving him orders. Mattie pressed her only piece of hardtack and dried meat into his hand. "You can't hunt them if you collapse," she said. "Eat, slow." He stared at the food, then at her. Something shifted in his gaze, not warmth. He didn't seem capable of warmth, but recognition, respect. He ate. Night settled around them. Crickets sang. A cool breeze finally swept across the burning plains. Garrett built a small fire, their horses tethered nearby. Mattie rested with her back against her saddle, exhaustion weighing down her limbs like wet wool. Garrett didn't speak for a long time. Then he broke the silence. "You're stronger than they knew." Mattie looked up sharply. "You survived 3 days on foot," he continued. "Most men wouldn't. You kept moving. You stayed alive. That takes grit." Grit, not beauty, not grace, not usefulness. He saw her strength, and for the first time in 31 years, Mattie felt something bloom inside her. Fragile, small, but fiercely alive. Hope. Garrett stood to check the horizon again, hand resting on his gun. "We'll reach them tomorrow," he said. "Be ready." Mattie nodded, breath steady. "I will be." She wasn't the same woman they'd left to die, and he wasn't the same stone-faced marshal who'd found her. They made camp in a small hollow between 2 low rises, where the grass grew taller and the wind softened to a murmuring whisper. The sky above them was a bowl of stars, so many, so sharp, Mattie felt as if the heavens had cracked open just to watch them. Garrett set the perimeter first. He always did. Moving with silent efficiency, he walked the circle around their camp, checking the ground for tracks, testing the wind, scanning for movement. He didn't explain his process. He didn't need to. Everything he did was rooted in years of habit. Learn the land, secure the ground, protect the people under your watch. Tonight, she was that person. Mattie sat on her bedroll, rubbing her aching legs. Her body still protested every movement, but she was no longer the woman crawling through dust on bloody feet. 3 days with Garrett Steele had taught her more about endurance than 31 years of life. He returned from his patrol and tossed a small bundle into her lap. "Change your stockings," he said. "Your blisters won't heal in torn fabric." Mattie blinked in surprise. You brought spare stockings?" "No," Garrett replied, crouching near the fire. "I bought them in Dodge before I left. I expected I'd be hauling bodies, not a hostage, but torn feet slow a person down. Slowing down gets people killed." That was the closest thing to "I care about your pain" she was ever going to hear from him. And strangely, it meant more because he didn't try to dress it in soft words. He tore a piece of cloth and dipped it in warm water from the tin pot hanging over the flame. Then he held it out to her. "Clean your feet. Carefully." Mattie hesitated. "I can do it later. You don't have to." "Do it now," he said, voice firm but not unkind, "or you won't make it through tomorrow." His focus was absolute, cold, practical. But his actions, those were something else entirely. Mattie followed his instructions, cleaning her torn skin, changing into the stockings he'd brought. Garrett didn't watch her. He cleaned his guns with the same thoroughness he approached every task. But the firelight caught the scar along his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. He looked older under starlight, lonelier. When she finished, he handed her a tin cup of watered coffee. "Drink," he said. "You need warmth." The coffee was bitter and thin, but it thawed the chill in her bones. Mattie wrapped her hands around the cup, letting the heat seep into her palms. "You always take care of people like this?" she asked softly. Garrett didn't look up. "No." "Then why me?" He paused for a long time before answering. "Because I saw them leave you to die," he said quietly, "and something about that didn't sit right." "That's not a reason." "It's the only one I've got." Mattie studied him, illuminated by flickering firelight. He looked like he'd been carved from the land. Wide shoulders, weathered skin, hands made for violence and work. But there was something in his eyes, something buried deep beneath the ice. A man who once cared too much. A man who lost something, or someone, and decided caring was weakness. "Garrett," she said gently, "you don't have to pretend you're made of stone." He didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, in a voice low enough it might have been mistaken for the wind, he said, "I'm not pretending." The fire popped. A spark spiraled upward. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He finally stood. "Rest. We'll leave before dawn." Mattie lay down, exhaustion folding over her like a blanket. She didn't expect sleep, but the fire's warmth, the steady presence of Garrett nearby, and the knowledge that she was no longer alone eased her into a soft, heavy slumber. A sound woke her hours later. Quiet, steady footsteps circling the camp. Garrett! He was doing another perimeter check. Matty watched him through half-closed eyes. He moved like a ghost in moonlight, silent, vigilant, shoulders tense with readiness. He stopped every few feet, listening, scenting the air like a predator, eyes scanning the dark horizon. She realized something then, something important. Garrett Steele didn't sleep well, or often. Men who slept like that had seen too much, lost too much. When he finally returned to the fire, he noticed her awake. "You should be sleeping," he murmured. "I was. You woke me." "Good." He settled beside her bedroll, not close, but close enough to shield her from the wind. "Means your instincts are sharp." Matty rolled to face him. "Garrett, thank you." "For what?" "For doing all of this. For not leaving me behind. For treating me like I'm worth saving." Garrett looked away sharply, jaw working. "You're a witness," he said. "Your life matters to the case." "That's not what I meant." His eyes flicked back to hers, quick, defensive, almost wary. "I don't do gratitude," he muttered. "You don't have to do anything," she replied softly. "I just wanted you to know." He didn't answer. Instead, he reached behind him, pulled a folded blanket from his saddlebag, and tossed it over her, roughly, almost gruffly, as if embarrassed by the gesture. "You're cold," he said. "And you?" "I'm not." It was an obvious lie, but Matty didn't push. She curled under the blanket, warmth blooming across her chest, not from the wool, but from the man who'd thrown it at her like an accusation. Garrett lay back on the ground a few feet away, one hand resting on his holstered pistol. Even in rest, he was coiled, ready, alert. Matty drifted off again, but the last thing she heard before sleep claimed her was his voice, quiet and almost tender. "You're safe, Matty, as long as I'm breathing." She didn't know if he meant to say it out loud, but it was the first time she'd felt the world soften around her since the day she'd been taken hostage. The dawn would bring danger, blood, justice. But tonight, they were two souls on the open prairie, sharing firelight, silence, and the first fragile thread of something that might, one day, become love. They broke camp before sunrise, the world still draped in blue shadow. Matty mounted her mare with a grunt of effort, every muscle stiff, but Garrett didn't comment. He adjusted her stirrup length without being asked, checking the cinch, her reins, even the angle of her foot in the stirrup. Practical care, not gentle, but care all the same. "Stay close," he said. "Taggart's gang is only hours ahead now." Hours until justice, or hours until bloodshed. They rode west, the prairie lighting slowly from blue to gold. Dew soaked their boots. Meadowlarks burst into song as the first rays reached the tall grass. "Garrett," Matty said quietly, "what will you do after this? After Taggart?" His jaw tightened. "Same thing I always do." "Which is?" "Keep riding." "Alone?" Garrett didn't answer. The silence was louder than speech. They rode for another mile before he finally broke it. "Men like me don't get to stay anywhere long." "Why not?" "Because staying means caring, and caring gets people killed." She stared at him. "What happened to you?" He didn't turn his head, but his voice dropped into something flat and hollow. "Before I was a marshal, I was a soldier, frontier cavalry. I rode under Captain Holden." Matty didn't interrupt. Garrett spoke rarely. When he did, every word mattered. "We were ambushed in Montana Territory. Hostiles hit us at dawn. Half the unit died in the first minute. I took a bullet to the leg, but I kept firing. Watched boys I'd trained with for years fall beside me." His hand closed on the reins until his knuckles whitened. We held the line for an hour. Reinforcements never came. They forgot about us, wrote us off, left us to die. For the first time, she heard something new in his voice. Not coldness, not anger, but old pain, worn down to bone. After the fight, I buried 6 men by myself, dug graves until my hands bled, promised I'd never be responsible for losing anyone again. Not friends, not partners, not family. No one. A tremor ran through Maddie's chest. You were just a boy. No, Garrett said quietly. I stopped being a boy that day. The wind carried his words away across the prairie, leaving silence behind. Maddie wanted to say something, comforting, soft. But Garrett Steele was not a man who wanted softness. So she offered him truth instead. You didn't lose me. He gave her a sharp look. Not yet. You won't, she said. I'm not helpless. I survived the Taggart gang. I can survive the rest of this. You survived because you're stubborn, he corrected. And you, she said, because you didn't leave me behind. He looked away again. Another hour passed. Then Garrett suddenly tensed. Maddie felt it before she saw it. The shift in his posture, the alert in his eyes. What is it? She whispered. Riders, he said. 3, closing fast. Her pulse spiked. Taggart? No, can't be. Wrong direction, wrong formation. He swung off his horse with one smooth motion, drawing his spyglass. Maddie's mare pawed nervously, sensing the tension. Garrett steadied her with a single hand on the bridle, his presence calming even the animals. When he looked through the glass, his face hardened. Bounty hunters. Are they after us? After Taggart. And they'll kill anyone in the way, including you. Maddie's breath caught. We should hide. No time. Garrett holstered the glass and checked his guns with rapid, silent precision. They're too close. If we run, they'll chase. If you're caught, they'll use you as leverage, and they'll shoot first. Question never. Maddie's heart thundered. What do we do? Garrett turned to her, voice low and steady. You ride behind me. Stay on my right. Don't speak unless I speak to you. Don't draw attention. She nodded quickly. He didn't stop there. He stepped closer, adjusting her reins carefully, gently straightening the strap on her saddlebag. Then, unexpectedly, he rested his hand on her knee, just for a moment, a grounding touch, a reassurance he didn't know how to voice. You're going to be fine, he said. I won't let anyone hurt you. The riders appeared over the ridge, 3 men in dust-coated coats, rifles slung across their backs, eyes sharp with greed. Garrett nudged his stallion forward, placing himself between them and Maddie. Morning, the lead hunter called. You look like you've been tracking someone. Passing through, Garrett replied. That so? The man's gaze slid to Maddie. What's with the woman? Garrett's tone went colder than a Montana winter. Not your concern. You traveling with her? Yes. Why? Maddie saw Garrett's spine stiffen, saw the calculations running behind his eyes. He needed a reason that wouldn't expose her or make her a target. Finally he said, She's my partner. Maddie nearly fell off her horse. One of the bounty hunters laughed. Hell of a partner. Looks like she'd slow you down more than help you. Garrett's hand brushed the butt of his gun. A warning. She pulls her weight, he said. More than some men. Maddie's throat tightened. For the first time in her life, a man had defended her without hesitation, without shame. Garrett leaned slightly back in his saddle. Keep riding, he said to them. Taggart's west, 2 days. But if you ride into my path again, we'll have a problem." The men muttered among themselves, but they moved on. The moment they were out of sight, Mattie sagged, shaking. Garrett rode back to her immediately. "You all right?" You said I was your partner." "You are." His voice softened for a fraction of a second. "In this, in the hunt, that counts." Mattie looked at him, not as a marshal, not as a distant protector, but as a man carved by loss, held together by discipline, yet slowly, piece by piece, allowing her in. "Garrett," she whispered, "thank you." He didn't say you're welcome. He didn't smile. But he touched her reins gently, steadying her trembling hand. "We ride," he said, "together." And as the wind swept across the plains, Mattie realized something with a sudden, startling clarity. He was starting to care. He didn't want to. He didn't know how to. But the cracks in his armor were there, right where she'd learned to see them. By late afternoon, the plains had darkened into a bruised purple. The heat sucked away from the land as thunderheads rolled in from the west. Lightning forked silently behind the clouds, promising a storm that would break hard and fast. Garrett slowed his stallion, scanning the horizon with the instinct of a man who'd survived too many ambushes to ignore a prickle of warning. "They're close," he murmured. Mattie followed his gaze. A narrow ravine cut through the prairie ahead, its entrance jagged like the mouth of some ancient beast. Smoke curled faintly from somewhere inside. "The gang," she whispered. "Taggart," he said. "He's hurt. He'll hole up in tight ground where he can defend himself." Garrett's voice dropped lower, almost soft. "Stay behind me, no matter what happens." Before she could respond, he nudged his horse forward, leading her into the ravine. The smell hit first: gunpowder, sweat, and something metallic. Blood. Garrett dismounted and motioned for her to stay in the saddle. Then he moved ahead, silent as a predator, his pistol drawn but low. A voice snarled from the shadows. "Marshal, I knew you'd come." Cole Taggart lay propped against a boulder, his left arm slick with dried blood, his face pale and furious. Two of his remaining men crouched behind overturned saddlebags, rifles aimed straight at Garrett. "Drop the gun," Cole hissed, "or my boys drop you." Garrett didn't even blink. "You had 7 men 3 days ago. Now you've got 2. Think hard." Cole spat blood. "I'll kill you. Then I'll kill the woman. You think I don't see her back there? The fat cow you dragged along? She's good as dead anyway." Mattie froze. Garrett didn't. He stepped forward. And for the first time, Mattie truly saw it. The change in him when she was threatened. Something cold and lethal settled over him, the same force she'd glimpsed during the canyon fight. But this time, it wasn't duty or bounty driving him. It was personal. "You won't touch her," Garrett said quietly. "You won't speak about her. You won't even breathe in her direction." Cole barked out a laugh. "You think she matters? She's nothing." Garrett raised his pistol. "You're wrong," he said. Everything happened at once. Cole shouted, drawing. His men fired. Garrett moved faster than Mattie had ever seen, diving sideways, using a boulder for cover as bullets screamed past. The ravine erupted in thunder, gunfire echoing until it sounded like 100 rifles instead of 3. Mattie ducked low in her saddle, heart pounding against her ribs. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. Garrett had told her to stay behind him, and she would. Garrett returned fire. One fluid shot, one outlaw down. Another shot. The second outlaw staggered back, clutching his shoulder. Cole hurled himself toward Mattie's horse, a knife flashing in his good hand. Maddie's breath caught, but Garrett was already there. He closed the distance in seconds, slamming Cole to the ground with a force that knocked the knife spinning into the dust. They grappled, a brutal tangle of fists and grit. Cole fought like a man with nothing to lose. Garrett fought like a man with something to protect. In the struggle, Cole managed to grab a fist-sized rock and swung it toward Garrett's skull. Maddie screamed. Garrett caught Cole's wrist mid-swing and twisted. Bone cracked. Cole screamed. Garrett drove his forearm into the outlaw's throat, pinning him hard enough that the struggle died in seconds. "You left her for dead," Garrett snarled, breath ragged. "You made her walk 50 miles. You mocked her, and you thought nobody would give a damn." He pressed Cole harder into the dirt. "You were wrong." Cole's voice came out a strangled whisper. She's worthless." Garrett's fist slammed into his jaw, shutting him up instantly. "You don't decide her worth," Garrett said. "She does." Silence crashed into the ravine, heavier than the coming storm. Garrett rose slowly, chest heaving, his shirt torn and dust-coated, blood streaking down his arm. Maddie had never seen anyone look so dangerous or so alive. He walked toward her horse, and for a moment she thought he was still caught in the fight, still drowning in the years of anger he carried. But when he reached her, he softened. Just for her. He cupped her ankle in his hand, steadying her, grounding himself. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "You're safe," he said. "He won't hurt you again. Nobody will." Maddie's throat tightened. "Garrett, you didn't have to." "I did." His jaw flexed, emotion flickering in eyes that rarely betrayed anything. "For the first time in a long damn time, I had something to lose." Lightning split the sky above them. The storm broke, and Garrett Steele stood there in the downpour, rain streaking over the hard plains of his face, a man who'd finally exposed the one truth he couldn't hide anymore. Maddie mattered to him more than the law, more than revenge, more than the fear that had chained him for 15 years. She mattered. He didn't say the words. He didn't need to. The storm didn't let up for hours. Sheets of rain turned the prairie to mud, the sky cracking open with thunder that shook the ground beneath their horses. Garrett led them through the downpour without hesitation, guiding Maddie toward the silhouette of an abandoned line cabin he remembered from an old cattle map. By the time they reached it, both were soaked to the bone. Garrett forced the swollen door open with his shoulder, ushering Maddie inside before tying the horses beneath the shelter of the overhang. The cabin was small, one room, one hearth, one narrow window, but it was dry, and that alone made it feel like salvation. Garrett knelt by the cold fireplace, striking flint with practiced movements. Sparks caught, flames bloomed, and the heat slowly pushed back the bitter chill. "Sit," he said quietly. "You're freezing." Maddie sank onto a low stool as he hung her cloak by the fire, steam rising from the heavy fabric. Her dress clung to her frame, and she wrapped her arms around herself, partly for warmth, partly to steady the riot inside her chest. Garrett removed his coat, water dripping from the hem, and hung it beside hers. In the flickering firelight, she could see the exhaustion pulling at his features, the blood caked along his sleeve from a shallow graze she hadn't noticed during the chaos of the fight. "You're hurt," she whispered. "It's nothing." "Garrett." She reached out before she could think. Her fingers brushed his arm. He stiffened, not in rejection, but in unfamiliarity, like touch was something he'd spent years avoiding. "Sit down. Let me look." He hesitated. Then he lowered himself onto the stool opposite her. Mattie tore a strip of cloth from her petticoat and dabbed gently at the graze. Garrett watched her hands, his breath controlled, his shoulders tense, as if tenderness was harder to endure than bullets. "You shouldn't have gone after Cole like that," she murmured. "I told you before," Garrett said, voice low. "I protect what's mine." The words stopped her breath. "Yours?" she whispered. He lifted his gaze, and in the firelight his steel-gray eyes were no longer cold. They burned, quiet but fierce, like the heart of a long-buried ember rekindled at last. "I tried not to care about you," he said. "Tried damn hard. But when Cole ran at you with that knife—" His jaw tightened, emotion flickering raw and unguarded across his scarred features. "I felt something break, and I can't put it back." Mattie's throat tightened. "Garrett, you matter to me," he said. "More than the job, more than the bounty, more than everything I told myself I needed to be." The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the air charged and warm, as if the storm outside had poured its electricity straight into the room. Mattie swallowed, heart trembling. "I never expected you to feel anything for me." Garrett leaned closer, his voice a rough confession scraped from somewhere deep inside. "You're strong. You're brave. You survived hell and still kept going, and you look at me like I'm not broken beyond repair." "You're not," Mattie said, her voice breaking. "Not to me." For a moment, just a moment, Garrett let himself breathe. Really breathe. Then he reached for her hand, his calloused fingers enveloping hers in a touch so careful it shattered her completely. "I can't promise I'll say the right things," he murmured. "I can't promise I'll be soft. But I can promise this. You'll never walk alone again. Not while I'm alive." Mattie's eyes filled with tears. Firelight danced across the walls. The storm softened to rain. And in that small, weathered cabin on the Kansas plain, something fragile and fierce took root between them, something neither of them had ever dared hope for. "Garrett," she whispered, squeezing his hand, "I'm not going anywhere." He exhaled, a sound that trembled like relief, like surrender. "You're home now," he said softly, "if you'll have it." Mattie nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll have it," she whispered, "and I'll have you." Stories like Mattie and Garrett's remind us that strength comes in many shapes, and sometimes the fiercest battles are fought inside the human heart. Each of you listening carries your own scars, your own quiet courage, and your own longing for a place where you are seen, valued, and safe. Every time I read your comments, I'm reminded how stories connect us across oceans and time zones. Tell me, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe, even a little, that love can find you in the unlikeliest places, stay with me. The next story is already waiting for you.